Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. And today we're joined again by Chantelle Campbell. So thank you again, Chantelle, for joining us. Perhaps maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into law, and we'll try to go in a different route this time because everyone can always watch your great interview from last year.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much, JP, for having me. It's always a pleasure to be able to connect and speak with people and just kind of give them a little bit more about who I am, what I do, and where I am today. So, we definitely recorded a few months, actually last year. It feels like a few months because we've been in the pandemic, but last year. And we talked about my business, which is legal advocacy services. I specialize in landlord and small claims matters. If you want more information, check out the site. Who am I as a person? So let's start off with, I guess, my journey. So growing up, I never really saw myself in the field of law. And I think it wasn't until maybe my later years in high school that I felt this inclination to want to study and have this curiosity about the profession. I went to York University, did a double major in law and society and philosophy with a practical certificate in ethics, business ethics, etc. Finished, felt really confident, and went through a series of experiences, both personally and professionally, that led me down a really interesting path, which led me to become a licensed paralegal back in 2012, 2013, I want to say. With that being said, I really want to talk about not just the academic side of my journey, but also the professional development side. So much like many other students, I had no clue really what I wanted to do with this paralegal education. I didn't understand at the time the amount of experiences, the amount of different paths that you could take with the knowledge. I just was looking for a way to make my education a lot more practical, a lot more hands-on, and I had the university experience, which was fantastic, but I wanted something that I can kind of sink my teeth into. And throughout my journey with education, I've done so many things, not just from an educational standpoint, but also working. So I've worked at the Law Society Tribunal, which was an amazing experience. And I saw what hearings look like. I saw what happens when lawyers find themselves in really uncomfortable positions where they're being questioned about their practice, about their trust accounts, about their money. I was a fly on the wall for some time. I've worked at places that deal with real estate. You know, how does real estate handled and mattered? I worked with sole practitioners, and I've done some stuff with criminal. I basically did everything I can get my hands on. And for me at the time, it wasn't even about money. It was just, how do I figure out what I like to do, or how do I get my niche? And through that path, it led me into a practice that is now primarily landlord tenant based and small claims based with litigation. As far as working with the community and working with the OABP, it's been a really interesting path for me. I finally feel like I have a place that I belong from an organizational standpoint. I work with some amazing people. You've met all of them so far already in previous interviews. And if you haven't had a moment to check these interviews out, please do so. Fantastic people, different backgrounds, different perspectives, and different histories on what led them to the organization. I feel like this is an organization that is different. And I don't just say that because I sit on the board as vice president, but I say that because I meet with these people on a monthly basis, and everybody's open. Everybody's wanting to develop themselves. Everybody's wanting to give of their knowledge. Everybody's wanting to be in a position to really create something phenomenal. I feel like this organization is very timely, not just for the Black community or for Black paralegals, but for the community at large. And I'm honored and happy to be here. And I am hoping that throughout today's talk, I can really get into, a couple of things to shed some light on who we are, what we do, and how, I guess, my contributions now and moving forward will be incorporated in everything.
Okay, perfect. So Chantal, maybe you can tell us a little bit more. I mean, certainly have talked to everybody else on the board already this month, but maybe you can tell a little bit more from your perspective in terms of what is the Ontario Association of Black Paralegals to you, and I know that you kind of came in a little later. So how did that all come about?
Okay, so I think for me, it is a community first and foremost. So I don't want to say organization because organization feels very transactional. It's not just a space whereby you come, you take a course, or you interact with people and you leave. It really is a community. It's a space of inclusivity. And when I say that, I mean inclusivity as far as we want to be available, we want to be open, and we want to be a space whereby everybody feels comfortable, both the new graduate and also the seasoned individual in practice. We want to be able to bring in and keep and maintain the type of members that feel as if what they're saying is being heard. It's a space for growth, definitely. Being a new organization, being a new community, it's a space for growth. It's a space to consider and look at and investigate and solve problems as we speak to racialized minorities, as we speak to racism, the ways in which it's played out within our field of work, within our sphere. It's a way to look at and investigate areas of privilege, question things, and it's a space for us to learn and to develop. It's a space for us to be honest, and it's a space for us to be safe. With all the interviews, we talked a lot about this imposter syndrome. And a lot of people of color, especially, suffer with this in business. We wonder if we belong. We wonder if we should be around. And if we wonder, what's going to happen if we venture out into this, for a lot of us, new area. And I feel as if this organization / community, I don't want to just make it about an organization, but this community that we're building gives us the confidence to be able to grow because we have people of like-minded interests. So yes, we are all paralegals, but we are also people. We come in with various different backgrounds. Some of us are coming in and this is a second or third career. Some of us are coming in and we're not from the jurisdiction. Maybe we did a law degree overseas, and this is an opportunity to get some jurisdiction within Canada without doing the entire law degree. That's, a space for some people as well. For others, they're coming out of high school and they're wondering, is this the space I really want to be in? I feel like the law in and of itself is so daunting. It's so intimidating. It's so structured and formal that sometimes it can be extremely impersonal. And having these types of communities with people that look like you, that sound like you, who may or may not have had similar challenges, help you to stretch, to grow, but also give you that support in a way that I don't think we've seen before. And that's what attracted me to the board. When I was asked to join, what had attracted me to this board was the fact that it wasn't just a paralegal organization, but it was an organization that spoke to a niche. And I think if you're going to serve the public, you need to kind of figure out, well, what is the niche that we're focusing in on? Who do we support and how do we support? And that's what drew me to the board. I was one of the final members, myself and Sasha were one of the final members to come in, but we've definitely come in board and have the vision of the organization and the community at our hearts. And we're working hard to really have members join us. You'll hear a little bit more about our membership on the 28th. Hopefully you guys will all be around to watch. But that is what drew me to this organization.
And so maybe you can highlight in terms of the first year there. I mean, everyone has the different events that kind of, that Deborah shared, and Royland and Sasha and April. But what for you in that first year, what did you see there in joining the board there, and then all that you've accomplished in 2021 and I guess a little bit of 2022 before the 1-year anniversary kicked in?
I think, well, you've heard all the capstone highlights from all of my other members on the board. One thing that stood out to me is the community response. And what I mean by community response is we had a session whereby we invited potential members to kind of air out what are some things that you want to see in this community. And I remember even having an individual from out of jurisdiction just simply joining because he mentioned that in his jurisdiction, which is the States, they don't have something like this. And that was the point that made me realize that we have something very special in that we have people outside of our jurisdiction looking and saying, wow, here is something new, here is something different. On that particular event, what caught my attention was the fact that unlike other spaces that tell you what you want as a consumer, this was an organization that, although I was new to at the time, wasn't just telling its members what they were going to provide, but they were asking their members what they wanted. And it was an ability, even before we rolled out membership, to really get a temperature for what's necessary. And I think having a newness and having people be able to tell us what they want, tell us where to go directionally, is what set this organization apart from me. And just looking at the doors that are being opened continuously, the partners that are agreeing, we are asking, we are receiving, and for the amount of things that we've completed in such a short time, I can only hope, and I'm only encouraged that we're only going to get stronger and stronger as time continues. We've had some fantastic leaders who you've seen, you've heard from them, and I'm just happy to be, a part of what we have to offer. But if I'm looking at everything so far, what stands out to me is the response of the community, both the Black community, both all of our other allies, and their willingness to be a part of the newness that we're developing, and being the first Black paralegal organization. We've had Black lawyers organizations. We've never had anyone deal with this specific demographic.
And I was talking earlier this week with Deborah, and I think maybe you caught that question there about that specific demographic, right? Now, what stands out when you're looking at Black paralegal group versus, the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers and the various law students organizations that are there from the different campuses? But what's specific about this demographic that that really your group is trying to kind of bring out?
I think fantastic question. And I think what differs in my perspective is access, diversity, and our ability to reach. So when I say access, not just within the Black community circle, but just overall, I feel like paralegals bring a vast diversity to the law field. And I say that for multiple reasons. Number one, unlike the traditional stream that gives you a trajectory straight into law school, and that's it, because of the pathway that you take educationally with the paralegal diploma or degree, depending on your pathway, you could have possibly been in other professions prior. And this could be a secondary profession. It's a lot easier to pivot to become a paralegal in Ontario than it is to pivot to become a lawyer. So with that being said, our demographics and our sociographics are a lot more accessible to the average person who would like to get into law, number one, both within Canada and also other foreigners coming in who are deciding, you know what, I want to be able to engage in this field, and it allows me greater access, right? There's diversity from the standpoint of not just racial diversity, but diversity in thoughts, diversity in perspective. When you create access opportunities, which is what the paralegal profession does, you also create the diversity of different perspectives. So we're looking at a group of people who are dynamic in so many different ways, coming in from so many different walks of lives, deciding that they're going to practice or not practice, work in office or not, but you have that option. And as far as what we provide differently, I do think that we are one of the, I don't know if there's any other organizations that speak to specific need groups, but we are speaking to a demographic that usually feels very disempowered. We know that in 2020, it was the year of many things. COVID stands out, but if you look at the scenario that happened in the States and how the impact showered all across the world, it was a time that people began to recognize matters of injustice, matters of representation, matters of access, and the Black community was extremely vocal. I feel like this is an organization that picked up that mantle to want to action. There was a lot of talk as to what should happen, but this did happen, and it continues to happen. And it's not just a reaction to 2020's events, but it's setting on the agenda, setting on the calendar within the legal community, things that I believe should have been on the agenda many years ago. So yes, we are an organization that looks to advocate for the benefit of our community, but I feel like our reach is so much more. The stronger we are, is the stronger our legal community is, because we are not separate and apart. We are inclusive, and we work with allies and affiliates and everybody else to make our spaces more inclusive, more accessible, and more diverse.
Now, in terms of that affecting that change, now what are some of the issues there that the organization, whether they've already addressed it or are going to continue to address, that stands out for you as a Black paralegal, right? What specifically are the things that maybe, again, you were out on your own, you didn't know about, there was no organization like this more than a year ago. So how does that kind of play in, especially with paralegals being tending to be sole practitioners, right? That there's there's a disconnect within the paralegal community itself, but kind of now bringing these issues together. And do you have a sense of, you mentioned that meeting, I think I was there, where people were sharing about the different problems that they're going through, and then they realized that, well, other people are going through those problems too, that I didn't realize that, right? I mean, we're talking about that imposter syndrome. Sometimes you feel like, do I belong here? What can you kind of share about all of those things?
I think one of the key takeaways would be mentorship, which is something that we are working to create with the launch of our membership at the end of this month. So when we say mentorship, people tend to think very formal. And the purpose of this community is to have different types of mentorships. Some may be these formal mentorships whereby you have a seasoned professional working with a junior professional. You can also have peer mentorships. Maybe you and another practitioner on the same level want to have a certain level of accountability, want to help each other out. As I mentioned, because the paralegal profession speaks to a very dynamic audience, yes, you're coming in as a paralegal, but you may come in with a business degree. You may come in with an MBA. You may come in as, I don't know, a medical professional and be able to use that specific lens to be able to dominate a tribunal. Right? There's so many different ways to market, to brand, to share knowledge. So having mentorship, depending on what your needs are, I think for our organization will be pivotal. It will be something that will set us apart because we're allowing members to peer mentor, to be able to mentor from a senior, junior perspective, and to mentor from maybe other spaces. So maybe you have a practitioner who practices in one area of law, but they've always wanted to see what it was like to work corporate or to do criminal or to do, I don't know, consent and capacity hearings. Having other people in a network where it's an established safe space allows you to pivot a lot easier and know that there are resources out there. Number two, I think having credible resources. So we're living in a day and age whereby somebody can just say something, market it, it looks fantastic, and we assume they are the authority. The benefit to being a part of an organization is that we vet the materials that are coming out of our organization. So versus a person self-teaching and maybe just YouTubing it, you have a credible organization saying, we are committed to giving you the top quality or the cream of the crop to be able to help you make your decisions. Outside of that, mentorship from the standpoint of, we think just legal, but as you know, running a business has various components. So great, you have your legal connections, but one of the things I don't think law schools or schools in the paralegal sector have mastered yet is giving members and students resources outside of law that deal with running a business. I know that Ryerson Law is looking at, kind of expanding that area, but what does it mean to be a successful business? How do you keep your books? How do you do corporate taxes? How do you, balance things? How do you run an office? How do you do administration? Having a network that caters to the needs of paralegals, but also looks at things that are not taught within the curriculum is a goal of ours. And having that network of people who can say to a new practitioner, hey, do you need an accountant? We know somebody. Or, hey, do you know anyone that knows anything about business? We know somebody. Having that safe space to be able to collaborate, I think is important and necessary for success.
Now, specifically, I mean, there's going to be student membership there as well. I know we've certainly taught at similar or the same schools so that you can kind of draw upon. What do you see from that experience teaching with students and why they should join the OABP?
I think especially in the COVID era where everything is online, everything is very impersonal. A lot of students are having anxieties about what's going to happen post-graduation. Right now, there's a huge issue of, oh my God, am I going to get a placement? And that's a huge, huge, huge concern. Outside of placement, though, when you actually graduate, students need a safe space to be able to talk things through. Being able to say, okay, so I've graduated, I don't know where I want to go. Having a person sometimes just to listen and to offer some suggestions or to offer some connections to say, hey, volunteer here or work here, or here's a case file, or let me review something, that alleviates the anxieties. A lot of students stepped out in faith and decided, I'm going to try something totally new, and they need a community. And I would encourage them to find the community that works best for the areas of development they want. I would speak as well to a lot of BIPOC students. We know that there's a need, and there's, based on some surveys and things that we've taken, to have that sense of community. People have mentioned it prior to, and this is an organization that exists. So connect with us. If there are things that you feel are missing or that you want to see, or you have some ideas, send us an email. We're always listening. We're not a static organization. We're open to hearing what you want. And from a student perspective, being in the classroom, hearing some of the concerns, being able to have these virtual chats, I hear from them that they're looking for more. And no matter what school you go to, it can't give you everything that you need. It's a starting point, right? So do yourself a service and start to research places that can give you what you need and what you want. And I would hope that OABP would be one of the places that you connect with.
And I guess the other thing there with respect to the OABP, and same thing when I was talking with Deborah as well, there's benefits for people who are not part of the Black community, right? And the importance of getting allies and people to join the organization. Maybe you can kind of expand on that and explain the benefits to those beyond the Black community.
Yeah. So I think when we talk about diversity or inclusion, we tend to think it's something that people within particular marginalized communities benefit from the most. And what's left out of the conversation is the fact that when we have a system that's inclusive for all, it works for all. So it's not just about us being able to fit into a system. It's about a system understanding how to work with us, how to speak to our communities, how to speak to our demographics, how to work with other practitioners, right? As a non-Black person joining from any community, there's definitely a lot to learn, a lot to gather information from, a lot of networks, a lot of connections, and a lot of great people you can meet. The good thing about networking, especially within these organizations, is it draws you into circles that you may not necessarily have joined organically. So because we know that the pandemic has kept everybody kind of in their homes, isolated, this is a great opportunity, whether you are from the community or not, to meet a bunch of people that you may have never encountered or worked with on a personal note. It's an opportunity to meet and make friends. I know often we think about networking being a professional, transaction, but this is an opportunity to meet some great friends, to socialize in a different space, to know some of the issues that are going on, to ask questions that maybe you're not comfortable asking in a formal setting, but it's informal and you want to know, and you want to be a part of things. You want to be a part of change. So as much as we are advocating and pushing for Black students and the Black community to join us, we are also pushing for everybody, from other circles to be a part of what we're building, because it really does help all of us create a more holistic legal system and legal education and legal development, really.
Now, you mentioned legal education, and that's going to be one of the pillars of the membership, the benefits of membership. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more of kind of beyond obviously Monday's starting point there for membership, but what's there to come there, and what are the things that you want to bring to the table, maybe differently than from all of the other people I've talked to about what would you like to see the OABP focus on in the future?
So I mentioned mentorship. That's definitely something that I want to focus in on. I also want us to look at how we can use the resources available to help our community grow. When I say community, I'm referring to our OABP community. So the people who join, how do they join and get a meaningful membership? So not just discounts on things, but meaningful things that are going to help you if you are in private practice, but not just private practice practitioners, but also how do you develop and grow if you maybe work in a firm or work under somebody? There's a lot of discussion happening about those who are in private practice, which we definitely need those resources. But what happens if you are a paralegal? Maybe you don't own a firm. Maybe you're not sure what you want to do. How do you gain greater exposure to develop yourself? If you are a person who's coming in and maybe you haven't decided on, is law for me? How does this membership support you, right? How do we become not just an organization, but a friend to you? How do we allow you to gain our trust? These are things that I would like us to develop as a group. This is something that I'd like us to focus in on. And I do think we are already on track for these things. And coming on the 28th, you'll hear a lot more. I don't want to spoil the surprises by any means, but what makes us different is that we want to be an active organization that gives things that are meaningful, to a larger group, not just people who are in private practice. Our CPDs are going to also be phenomenal. So being able to have these meaningful CPDs, have conversations and discussions that typically aren't had in an intersectional approach. So it's one thing, for instance, to talk about mental health, but let's talk about mental health in an intersectional approach to what happens if I am from XYZ community. How does that conversation generically about, for instance, mental health affect me as a person? If we talk about money management, for instance, okay, great, we're talking about money management, but how does it impact me from an intersectional approach? So it's not just putting out something that's cookie cutter, it's looking at how we get to specifics on the different elements of what make up a person that I think sets us apart from other spaces. And by no means does it mean that other spaces that currently exist aren't doing a phenomenal job or are not meeting their demographics. It just means that there's greater need for a different type of conversation that we're currently having.
Now, you just brought up mental health and intersectionality, and I know that there was a talk last year, a webinar surrounding that. And what can you maybe share from your experiences and certainly for students who are getting into a profession? I mean, both in terms of mental health generally, but then with that intersectionality being specific issues from the community that you're coming from.
Mm-hmm. I think first and foremost, I'm glad that the conversation is being had because traditionally it's not. Everybody's okay, everybody's fine, everybody's fantastic until, right? So being able to own that, a lot of practitioners, a lot of people who are in the legal industry are having these pressures to perform, these pressures to be perfect, these pressures to advocate and carry people on their backs when it comes to cases and speaking and advocating. It can be a lot. Everybody's experienced something. I know that especially during the pandemic, with staying at home, not seeing anybody, having work fluctuates, going from everything's open, everything's closed. I think all of us need an extended vacation if possible. What are some ways that we can, fuel everything that's going on and keep healthy? Number one, I'm going to say, I think we should be mindful to take care of ourselves. So let's not wait until we get to absolutely nothing to decide, maybe I'm not going to work this weekend, or maybe I'm not going to do an all-nighter. Maybe I am going to go to sleep and be okay. I think learning to set boundaries has been something that I'm also currently learning with everything. You can't do everything, and you can't do everything by yourself. What type of help do I need? Being able to pace yourself, and I think also having realistic expectations. So if we speak from an intersectional approach, there's a common term that you may have heard, and our audience may have heard, known as Black girl magic, right? The syndrome whereby we feel sometimes as Black females that you have to do everything, you have to be everything, you have to master everything. I think giving ourselves, and I speak from an intersectional approach as a Black female, maybe not putting as much pressure on yourself to be perfect, not putting as much pressure on yourself to have it all together, not putting as much pressure on yourself to be an answer to everybody all the time, and realizing that we are all humans that are coping and working and excelling as best we can at the level we can when we can. So these are some things that from a mental health perspective, I think conversations are finally being had. And we did have a CPD on this. We talked about it from different perspectives. For those of you that missed it, check it out. But these are things that I think are important and may not necessarily come up in traditional spaces.
And with that, obviously, then the comparison piece is always with, and I think they were called it the buzzword there, diversity, equity, and inclusion there. And what are you seeing, I guess, maybe now in the industry, or even looking at your various classes that you teach? I mean, is there more that we can be doing to promote diversity within the legal profession? And I think certainly if you look at the numbers in paralegals versus lawyers, that you're seeing a little bit more there. I don't know if I think the Law Society probably has those numbers, but what more can be done to kind of change that sort of conversation and further develop that conversation that, again, we talked about imposter syndrome or feeling a sense of belonging, that, hey, it doesn't matter what you look like, that you can be a lawyer, you can be a paralegal, and we're not going to think anything different just because of what you look like, that you're not part of the legal profession.
I think a lot has happened that wasn't happening before since 2020. And I think the pandemic, as horrible as it's been in a lot of ways, it's also given us an opportunity to reflect. And I think a lot more organizations now are moving towards having a more inclusive framework, or at least are open to a more inclusive framework. I think depending on where we find ourselves, whether it is within the education sector, whether we're working in an office, it's reclaiming our power and our voice to be able to, and it doesn't matter if you are from a BIPOC community or not, being able to recognize where your specific organization can do more. So it's one thing to talk about this overall legal system, but we have to understand that the legal system is comprised of small units and small pieces that come together. And I think what we need to start doing is looking at it from an individual perspective as to what can you influence. So I believe everybody has their own respective spheres of influence. They may be large, they may be small. You could be a receptionist in an office, you have a sphere of influence. You have a person you can talk to. You're working in a space, right? Being able to say as a receptionist, hey, I'm at XYZ firm and I feel like we don't do XYZ. We don't maybe communicate with a certain demographic. We don't have special programs, or we're not in tune with what this community may need. You may be a receptionist, but you have influence. If you are working a practice, you have the ability as an entrepreneur to create experiences from scratch, right? Using that authority. If you are working within an institution, I mean, you're working within a space that creates decisions and empowers, and being able to have a voice and to speak on these issues is something that is there. From an individual perspective, we also have this great thing known as social media. For those of you who enjoy social media, dialogue, you have the ability to create conversations, dialogues, ask, say things, and you have your own platform, right? In essence, you don't really need the cosign of specific organizations to make change. You can start to make change on your own platforms, start to have conversations, start to talk to people, start to look into things, and create that change. When you do have the power of organizations like OABP that say, we want to hear from you, it's not to sit back passively and hope they get it right, but it's to be a part of it and say, you know what, how do I become a member? How do I share my perspective? And how do I give of my time? In the future, we are going to be building and expanding. And when we have those asks to say, come on, volunteer, be a part, build, develop, take up the challenge, right? Come with some fresh ideas. Let us know what you have to offer, whether it be from the legal side of building or the business side of building, or just idea generation, etc. Come with something that we can use as well. So if the question really is, how do we change things? I think we change things by doing our individual work and then supporting the organizations who have dedicated themselves to continue on with what we're building.
And I guess how are we going to continue on there, right? I mean, I guess the natural follow-up, right? I mean, especially we're coming to the end of Black History Month, and you have February and forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is that forever piece there that needs to be done? That that's these things are not happening. People are putting all their individual efforts, and then then they get discouraged because there's it's not going beyond that sphere of influence, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it's to not forget and not to see efforts that we have as a community as just something that we do in February, not looking at our who we are as history, but knowing that we have a future, we are the future, and we are helping to shape what that future looks like. The president of our organization had a vision, right? She had something inside of her that she wanted to do, and she didn't just think about it or wait for somebody to create it. She created it. And as she continues to create, as we all continue to create, we pull other people in. I think we don't become static or complacent or assume that because there's a conversation or a buzz in the industry for diversity that the work is complete. I think that we make this entire conversation, this concept, this idea, this diversity, this inclusion, a part of our fundamental structures. And if it's fundamentally a part of what we're building forward, we can't forget, because it's always relevant, and we're always looking to continue on, and we're always looking to be innovative, and we're looking for ways that we can have different lenses on things. Intersectionality is a very complex yet simplistic principle. But I think if we keep that going with how we build and how we frame things, we are in a stronger place. The paralegal profession is so unique in that you can start off, whether you have a degree or not in this field, and you can build so much. As a profession, we are still quite young in comparison to lawyers, but there's so much that can be done with our knowledge base, right? When we decide to study or take CPDs or invest or spend our time or our energy in honing our crafts, let's not just look at the substantive side of our practice, right? Let's look at those other CPDs, courses, knowledge, experiences that keep this conversation going. I think we also vote with our spending powers as business owners or as individuals. What is the type of things that we're choosing to invest in? What do we want to continue to see? What do we want from our law society, right? What do we want from our benchers? These are ways of thinking that gets us beyond a static point of history into creating the future that we say that we want to have.
Now with that future, and I think Deborah had mentioned as well, going in and talking to not even just paralegal students, but even before that, whether they're university or high school even, right? That it's important to show the next generation of like the living history, right? Of like, this is what we're doing right now. And you can envision yourself being in these shoes when you go through that process, right? I mean, how much of that do you think is really important to see role models and to see people, within the industry that look like you?
I think it's really important. I remember when I was back in high school, we had a lawyer who at the time, she was a student rep for York, and she came in on career day. And the way she looked, the way she was speaking, her enthusiasm, it drew me to say, whatever she's talking about, I'm interested, right? That's my personal experience as a high school student. I think being able to have those experiences where you are talking to a larger audience beyond just who we service immediately is something that is like a seed. So you tend to plant a seed, and when you plant a seed, you don't see it right away. It takes some time. For some, it may take a couple months. For some, it may take a couple years. For some, it's way down the line. Letting people know, number one, what paralegals do is still something that I feel needs to be fully developed within Ontario. For the amount of people that we can and do service, a lot of people don't know about the expansion of certain jurisdictions. They don't know about their options. So that's not just us, that's the profession overall. But being able to let people know that there are more options on the table than they may understand or know is monumental. So we tend to think, especially very limited when it comes to, students, high school. Parents would think doctor, lawyer, teacher, right? That's it. Like, that's your future. And they don't recognize that there's so many different opportunities within Ontario to do things. Putting paralegal on the table and saying, this is a very viable option, and this is not a backup plan in the event that you don't go to law school. This is a profession that you can have, that you can make real money in, that you can make real impact in, that you can help develop and create a community by going through a particular path. Letting people know, letting guidance counselors know, letting students know, letting parents know, right? Letting parents know that if they have a high school student who is interested in the law, this is a possibility, right? What types of tools, resources do we need to develop those students even before they get to the college system, right? What type of analytical thinking, what type of reading skills, what type of comprehension, what type of public speaking skills, right? Looking at how do we develop not just people in a program, but how do we develop people overall to be their best selves. So when they apply that skill set or that ability to a program, it's successful, right? So I think it's very important. And I do hope that, in the future, as we continue to develop as an organization, we get opportunities to be able to kind of teach and show and demonstrate the opportunities that are out there.
And I totally agree, because I think still today, probably no one in high school probably knows what a paralegal exactly is, or I mean, not that many.
Yeah.
And especially when you look at people from BIPOC communities, where they may not have the money to go through and go for 4 years of university, 3 years of law school, maybe having to article where it's not even paid, that they can't see that as a possibility. Or there's at least more barriers in place there, financial barriers, but they could be a paralegal and being licensed within a year and a half after finishing high school.
Yeah. And it's something that, having these types of platforms, being on the board, allows us to be able to do this and to really educate, the community at large as to what are some viable career options, even if a person does desire to move on and matriculate to law school, because that is the desire of a lot of our population as well. It isn't an and or an or, right? It isn't an you do this or you do that. It could be an and. You can be a paralegal and you can decide to matriculate. You can be a paralegal, and depending on the scope of the work you're doing, you could have another degree, right? I mean, imagine a paralegal who, I don't know, has a science background, or a paralegal who is a nurse, right? Could you imagine the scope and the lens? When we talk about intersectionality, this is a part of it. You're not just one static identity. You could be something else and also be a person who is in the profession. We need that. When we talk about servicing clients, there are certain paralegals that, based on their background, they're better suited to handle certain types of matters because they've invested in themselves in different areas, right? So it's realizing that this is not a static career. This is not a fallback career. This is not a career that you go into because you weren't sure. This is a profession that's worthy and worth investing into. It's worth developing yourself for. And you spoke about the BIPOC community not having the funding per se, but if you are struggling and wondering, how am I going to get into this field? I would strongly advocate for you to consider this, right? Reach out and say, hey, what can I do with this? What are some things that I can plan for? And, hopefully that's something that we can discuss in maybe a future, CPD or group member, like how to get into the profession. But these are all, ideas and things that we want to continue to talk about.
And that goes all the way back to what you mentioned there about mentorship and the importance of mentorship. And again, wherever you are on that line, right? Whether you're in high school, the senior high school, the grade 12 students are mentoring, the grade 9s, and then from college and university, all the way up to senior partners and colleagues, right? So, I mean, that train kind of keeps moving on and everyone pays it forward. Now, I mean, I think probably a good time here, Chantelle, you can tell us, because on Monday, in 3 days, it's going to go live and people are going to be able to join of what that process is going to be like. And I know we're going to talk again on Monday with the rest of the board, but maybe you can tell us how they can become members and everything related to that.
So I definitely want everybody to check out our website, which is oabp.org. Check it out. Right now, we're down for maintenance. We go up again on the 28th. I want you to, in the meantime, subscribe and be able to get the updates. I also want you to follow us on any of our available social media accounts. So I want you to follow us on Instagram. I want you to follow us on LinkedIn. I want you to follow us on any of the portals that you see us on. You can reach out to the organization. If you don't have access to the organization, but you have access to one of us, any of us from the board, and you want more information, we can direct you to where the information will be. On the 28th, we will be launching. We're looking for new members. We're looking for persons who are interested, and we do want to hear from you. We'll be back on Monday to kind of go over everything in detail. But in the meantime, if this is something that is of interest to you, if this is something that you think you'd want to be a part of, Or if you have more questions and you're not sure about something and you have specifics, please reach out to us on the website. Once again, it's oabp.org. And Monday is the first day when we're welcoming new members. We are definitely excited. We are challenged and we're ready to get working and moving. We've been working behind the scenes, but this is the first time that we'll be actually actively taking on members.
Perfect. So Chantelle, thanks so much for joining us today, and already thank you in advance for coming back in on Monday. So it's back-to-back episodes here with you. Perhaps maybe you can end with some final words of wisdom here for the students in getting into the field and everything like that. And thanks again. And I guess I'll see you on Monday.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. So thank you for having me. For any students watching, know that this is definitely a journey. It's not something that is going to be completed right after you graduate. I definitely want you to celebrate, to take a moment to look at how hard it's been, the fact that you've overcome, but know that it's just the beginning. I also want you to give yourself some compassion and understand that sometimes things are not going to work out exactly how you think they may be. And you need to give yourself the freedom and the ability to pivot when necessary. I also want to encourage you to be open. You may end up practicing in an area that you never thought you'd lean towards. I never thought when I was in school I'd lean towards landlord tenant small claims. And it kind of came to me, and it continues to come to me very organically. So be open. Understand that going to school and becoming a paralegal is one thing, but the profession requires a lot of development, a lot of commitment, and sometimes a lot of patience. So don't get too hard on yourselves. Keep positive. Always stay connected with people that can assist you. And also try to have some fun and know that this is only one sector of your life. It doesn't define everything about you. And just continue to stay open, stay positive, and to put the work in, and you'll do well. So that's everything. And
Perfect
JP,
there. So thank you again for joining us. Always a pleasure there, and take care, everyone.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Because I cut there. I was going to say thanks, everyone. I don't know if that came through there, but thanks everyone for joining us, and take care. And I guess Chantal, I'll see you again on Monday. Take care,
Yeah,
everyone.
see you. Thank you.